In Seattle, police hope a bloody handprint will finger a killer. But the stain is barely visible. Can investigators bring the evidence into focus? A new computer promises to read a killer's mind. Can it really see the truth locked in the murderer's memory? 2 bodies are found in the California wilds. Clues are spotty and scarce. To bring the killer to light, police rely on a new laser technique. When evidence can't be seen with the naked eye, investigators must use extraordinary means to find it. As technology develops to tease out clues, it's providing detectives with an infallible witness. Forensic science is constantly evolving, from the discovery of the uniqueness of the human fingerprint to the ability to match a criminal to his crime through DNA profiling. Technology continues to provide investigators with new weapons. But fingerprint and DNA evidence are discovered in only 1% of all cases. When trusted techniques fail, investigators must turn to cutting-edge technology to bring invisible clues to light. On the clear spring morning of May 14, 1995, in Kirkland, Washington, just outside Seattle, Randy Acall returned from work and noticed that his neighbor's front door was propped open.
Hello?
Ordinarily, he wouldn't have given it much thought.
Hello?
But he had noticed that the door had been open when he had left for work the night before.
Anybody home?
Randy was a little worried and decided to see if everything was all right.
Hello? Hello?
As he entered the bedroom, a gruesome sight greeted his eyes. He found the body of a woman in her 30s lying in a heap at the foot of the bed. Her head was covered in the top bed sheet, and a t-shirt was bunched up around her neck. Blood stained the carpet beneath her. Horrified, Randy dialed 911.
Yes, I'd like to report an emergency.
Detective T.J. Klump of the Kirkland Police responded to the call.
It was Mother's Day, 1995, at about 10:30 a.m. in the morning. I was preparing to take my wife and daughter out for Mother's Day when, just prior to leaving, I received a call from the Kirkland Dispatch Center, and they requested that I immediately contact Sergeant Markle and the Detective Division that there had been a suspicious death that all the detectives were being called in for to investigate.
When the police reached the apartment, they saw no sign of forced entry. At first glance, there were none of the usual indications that a crime had taken place. The TV, the stereo, and other items of value were still in the condominium. Nothing had been disturbed.
Once I arrived there, and after we had obtained the search warrant, we entered the condominium. And the first thing that struck me was how clean it was for a crime scene. It was very clean, immaculate.
The killer seemed to have been meticulous in covering his tracks. Detectives set about trying to uncover what few clues they could. The case hinged on their ability to bring secrets of the crime scene out into the light. A driver's license was found in a denim purse. The murdered woman was identified as Dawn Fehring, a student at the Lutheran Bible Institute who had been living at the condominium for several months. Autopsy evidence, including the body's temperature and its state of rigor mortis, indicated that she had been killed within the last 24 hours. Further test results indicated that the victim had been sexually assaulted, but none of the culprit's DNA was found. The detective and his fellow officers carefully collected evidence from the scene, removing the bed sheets and sections of the blood-stained carpet. They hoped these might contain some clue to the killer's identity. They also found cigarette tobacco and ash near the bed. The victim didn't smoke. They were left by the killer, but were of little use. Another scrap turned up that proved more valuable.
While we were searching the condominium for evidence, we found a box of receipts. And Dawn Fehring was a very meticulous person. She was very organized. She saved receipts. She had phone logs. And she had saved some receipts, one of which was a receipt from 5/12 of 95. It was during the late evening hours. She had purchased some groceries at a nearby Fred Meyer's store.
To pinpoint Fehring's time of death and to determine whom she might have been with, police went to the grocery store listed on the receipt.
Roxanne, I'd like to show you this picture and see if you recognize this young lady.
A clerk remembered helping the victim. Fehring had come in near closing time. She had been friendly and in a good mood, and she had left the store by herself. Along with this information and the evidence gathered from the crime scene, investigators began to piece together the victim's final hours. After leaving the store just before 10 p.m. on May 12th, she apparently went straight home and unpacked her groceries. Putting herself through Bible school, Fehring kept track of every penny she spent. She placed her receipt in the box in her hall closet. She then began to bake a pan of brownies, possibly for a Mother's Day celebration the next afternoon. Police estimated it took her an hour to make the brownies. They found them cut and arranged on a plate by the stove. By retracing Fehring's steps, investigators arrived at an estimated time of death. Pinning down the time of death narrowed the killer's window of opportunity. But who killed Dawn Fehring? Careful scrutiny of the crime scene revealed the faint traces of what might have been finger and palm prints on the bed sheets, traces of the murderer preserved in the victim's own blood. But there was no way to dust or lift the prints from the sheet. Detectives needed to somehow make them clear enough to be useful. The evidence was passed on to King County latent laboratory scientist Pat Warwick.
When we opened up the evidence, we could tell there was some kind of body fluid on the sheet, but any discernible detail, any kind of handprint or anything was very, very difficult.
The print was smeared and faint. No one had ever tried to lift a fingerprint from cloth before, and this one promised to be particularly difficult. Warwick believed his best hope might be to process the prints with amido black, a forensic dye that highlights organic proteins such as blood. But amido black was usually used on hard, non-porous surfaces. Its use on fabric could jeopardize this crucial piece of evidence. Warwick called the FBI for help. but they could offer no advice beyond agreeing that amido black was the best approach. If Warwick used amido black on the sheet fragment, the dye and the rinses in distilled water might well destroy the print. But if the process worked, Warwick would be breaking fresh ground in forensic analysis. Warwick was extremely careful, but it seemed he was not careful enough. When he immersed the fabric in the inky solution, his worst fears were realized. The entire swatch, palm print and all, turned an opaque shade of dark purple. Any hope of getting a legible print seemed lost. In Seattle, authorities investigating the murder of Dawn Fehring feared that the only forensic evidence, a palm print, was ruined. Hoping to find another lead, detectives questioned the victim's neighbors. Was this a crime of opportunity? Or was the killer someone Dawn Fehring knew and trusted enough to let in her door?
About a year? I think we're about a year now, yeah. Yeah,
While the work of the detectives moved forward, there was a glimmer of hope in Pat Warwick's laboratory. He was relieved to see the excess dye begin to rinse away from the palm print. As he hoped, the amido black dyed the bloodstains purple. But it also stained the fabric light blue, making it difficult to discern the palm print from the weave of the fabric. The confusion of the two patterns made a clear analysis next to impossible. Warwick contacted his colleague, Eric Berg, an expert in the field of digital imaging and enhancement at the Tacoma Police Department.
Yeah, I don't know how good it's going to be, but just let me know, and we'll get down here.
Could Berg's computers and high-tech cameras read the bloody palm print and identify the killer?
Piece of sheet here. Get some amido black on it.
Up in here?
There might be something there.
Berg used a digital camera to capture the print. It gave him the flexibility he needed to manipulate and clarify the image. Once he obtained the digital images of the bloody print, he followed strict chain of evidence procedures. The images were tracked with a system that protected them from tampering or accidental alteration.
The software that we use uses the data encryption standard, which is a governmental standard that actually will allow you to mathematically prove that an image or any kind of a digital file has not been altered.
To preserve the original picture, he made copies to work from. Now he was ready to clean up the print. But the image was still in such poor condition, he was not confident he could do much. The ridges of the fingerprint seemed hopelessly tangled with the fabric weave.
Now, at this point, I would put in the source. You could just start to follow a ridge line on the print, and then all of a sudden the weave pattern would come in and disrupt your eye, and you'd go off on a tangent, and you couldn't follow that ridge without constantly being interrupted by the fabric pattern. So the biggest problem was that fabric pattern. We had to find a way to just suppress it or get rid of it somehow, and then look at the print, what was left after that. And if I move my box over here...
Berg used software to filter out the background pattern.
You can see,
while it didn't entirely remove the weave pattern, it managed to blur it, allowing the ridge detail to stand out in clearer relief. But it seemed to Berg that while every step made the image of the bloody print a little clearer, it also created new problems for him to solve. In blurring the fabric pattern, this process significantly reduced the contrast of the image. It remained to be seen whether he could make sense of the print. While Eric Berg struggled to render a clear print, the Kirkland detectives continued to question the victim's neighbors.
I was in a hurry. I had to get off.
So you left for work last night about 9 o'clock?
Right, about 9 o'clock.
The names of 5 men living near the victim's condominium complex came up with prior arrest and fingerprint records. One of these men was Eric Hayden, who lived in the apartment above the victims. When Hayden drove into the condominium parking lot, the detectives were waiting to speak with him.
Well, let's wait until he brings.
I looked over at the driver, who was a white male in his late 20s, and I noticed that he was smoking a cigarette, and he was looking over at us with his eyes, but yet his head remained facing straight ahead. I thought this was kind of suspicious.
Hayden strolled past the officers without acknowledging them and disappeared into his condominium.
We waited a few minutes, and we wanted to see if he would return outside, which he did. He walked back down the stairs and again walked past us, not looking over at us, and was walking directly towards his car. It was at that time I approached him and I said, "Excuse me, are you Eric Hayden?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And I asked him if I could ask him a few questions about that night, to which he agreed.
Hayden claimed he'd been out drinking on the night of the murder and knew nothing about it. He had noticed nothing unusual when he came home. He puffed on a cigarette as the conversation began. To the detectives, he seemed nervous.
When you went upstairs, did you notice?
But a case of nerves would never be enough for a conviction if Hayden was the killer. The police still needed solid evidence, and pressure remained heavy on Eric Berg to provide it.
4 or 5 times.
In his lab, he fed the image of the bloody palm print through yet another computer program. This step raised the tonal values of the ridge detail, much like adjusting the contrast on a television screen. Finally, using all his software and expertise, he produced an image clear enough for comparison with the prints of any suspects. Police asked Warwick to check the prints of the 5 men with criminal records who lived near the condo complex, and that included the prints of Eric Hayden.
They gave us the name of Eric Hayden, and we checked our file, and we had some prints of his on file in our agency. So we pulled those for comparison. Well, once you're looking at the comparison and you're making the positive opinion of a match, as a late examiner, there's that short period of time when you're the only one who knows. You know, the detectives don't know, no one knows. And then so it gives you a real sense of accomplishment.
On May 31st, Pat Warwick called the detectives and told them he had made a positive match. The prints on the bedsheet did indeed match the prints of Eric Hayden. That same night, the Kirkland detectives went to Hayden's condominium to execute a search warrant.
Officers, open the door.
Eric Hayden, we have a warrant for your arrest. Lay down, face down on the deck.
Going for it.
Hayden was handcuffed and arrested.
What's going on?
His apartment was searched top to bottom, and his girlfriend was questioned.
Ma'am, I'm Detective Plum.
He was charged with first-degree murder.
The arrest of Eric Hayden.
After Hayden's arrest, police began to piece together a picture of the gruesome events of May 12, 1995.
Yes?
They speculated that Eric Hayden had gained entry to the victim's home, probably through some false pretense.
I can help you.
A brutal assault and murder followed shortly thereafter. At some point, Hayden lingered over his victim, enjoying a cigarette. He placed it on the night table and covered the victim with a sheet. He then wiped his bloody hands on the sheet. As he left the scene, one of the victim's slippers jammed in the door, propping it open. It had been the open door that first attracted attention to the crime scene. Though the suspect was in custody and evidence strongly linked him to the crime, Detective Klomp's case was not airtight. Hayden's lawyers asserted that the digital technology was too new to be relied upon at the trial. They argued that the enhanced images might have been altered or tampered with. Any new forensic technology undergoes intense legal and scientific scrutiny.
Hold it right there.
Hundreds of cases have been lost through improper evidence handling procedures. At the heart of the defense team's argument was their view that a virtual image might falsely incriminate a very real and innocent man.
Some amino black on it.
Had Hayden's attorneys been successful in this challenge, losing those prints as evidence would have seriously damaged the prosecution's case. But Eric Berg took extra care to explain the process to the members of the jury and to let them decide for themselves.
We took this into court, we took the equipment with us, we set it up, we took the sheet that we originally received from King County, and we actually captured the image in court, brought it into the computer, performed all of the steps that we had done, and printed out the image, and we were able to show the jury that everything we did there is the same as what we did before, and the result is the same and it's repeatable.
Satisfied that Berg's digital enhancement techniques were sound, credible, repeatable, and damning, the jury needed only 3 hours to return their verdict: guilty of murder in the first degree.
This technology was incredible. It helped us solve the case much faster than we would have been able to having just gone out and contacting people or waiting for additional information to come in. This left no doubt in anyone's mind that this was the killer. It positively identified the killer.
Those prints, which had seemed to be just smudges at first, had finally yielded their secrets to the new digital imaging technology. Ultimately, they betrayed Eric Hayden to justice. Hayden left behind his handprint, thinking it was an illegible smudge. He didn't know that computer enhancement could turn that faint residue into a clear picture of guilt. Other criminals take greater pains to conceal the traces of their crimes, but the remnants of murder aren't so easy to hide. Forensics has ways of flushing them out. On a frigid January morning in 1987, a fur trapper was checking his traps in the blizzard-bound Cactus Flats region of California's Big Bear. It was hard going in such miserable weather. At about 11 that morning, he noticed a large oblong object covered in the new blanket of snow. There in the wilderness lay an abandoned mattress. The strange find seemed innocuous enough, but as the trapper checked around it, he made a macabre discovery. He hurried to the nearest telephone and summoned the police. Homicide Sergeant Gary Stroop of the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department responded to the call.
When we got there, it was just starting to snow again, and it's probably about 18 degrees. So we were trying to do the scene as fast as we could so we could get out of there before we got stranded.
Beneath the mattress lay 2 bodies, a man and a woman, both murdered. Stroop found that in one way the weather had worked in his favor. The cold had protected the bodies against decomposition. He was also fortunate to find the bodies intact.
Check down there. See if there's anything.
There's a lot of animal activity up there. There's bears, mountain lions, coyotes, you name it. Had the weather been warmer, we probably would have had animal activity on the bodies.
Footprints, anything?
But who were the victims? Who had taken their lives?
tell you one thing.
The only clues at the scene were the victims and the mattress. The man had some distinctive tattoos that resembled the kind worn by convicts.
I see blood down there.
The detectives tried to identify him by checking prison records.
Homicide, Sergeant Stroop.
Sergeant Stroop's hunch about the tattoos paid off. The fingerprints taken from the man matched those of an ex-convict named Richard Crisson.
Yeah.
The woman was identified as his girlfriend, Shanna Thole.
Yeah, no, I just...
Autopsy evidence showed that both victims had died of multiple shotgun blasts. Through prison records, detectives were able to locate and question Richard Crisson's family. Crisson's brother told police that Richard and Shanna had gone to Victorville to see a man by the name of Archie Woods.
Richie and Shanna. Yeah, Officer Barnes, I called you earlier.
According to the brother, Crisson dealt drugs for Woods, who was a motorcycle gang member. This information, along with a background check of Woods, made him the detective's prime suspect. The police paid a visit to Archie Woods. His house lay in a secluded area 20 miles from where the victims were found. Woods wasn't at home. The detectives were greeted by Archie's girlfriend, Sherry Mills. She told the officers she didn't know where he was, but reluctantly agreed to let them in. Even before they entered Archie Woods' home, a possible clue caught their eye. On the front porch, beside the door, they found 2 spots that appeared to be blood. The stains could have been nothing, or they could have been the clue that would break the case wide open. It was too soon to tell. The detectives hoped to find the answer inside. Police investigating the deaths of Richard Crisson and Shanna Thole chased the only lead they had. At the home of drug dealer Archie Woods, they sought any clues they could find.
What time did Richard and Shauna leave? Still awake?
The detectives informed Woods' girlfriend, Sherry Mills, that they were told Shanna and Richard had visited the house.
You had some friends over?
Mills admitted that Crisson and Thole had indeed been there, but only to spend the night on their way somewhere else.
Yeah, so who was it last
She
night?
had no idea of their destination.
Well, it was our friend Rich and,
Inside the house, detectives saw more brown spots that resembled blood. The house smelled of fresh paint. In the back bedroom, they found several paint cans. There was no sign of a mattress. If the murders occurred in this bedroom, police suspected that the paint covered crucial evidence. Police needed a way to see beneath it to look for evidence of a murder. It was the only way they could connect the homicides to this potential crime scene. They ordered a search warrant and then notified the crime scene unit that they had a difficult problem to solve. In the yard, officers noticed several wide, low-profile tire tracks, consistent with those made by a sports car. The woman victim, Shanna Thole, was last seen driving her high-performance sports car. The obvious bloodstains were examined, and the visible evidence was collected. Even so, the police were stymied. If the blood found at the house matched Thole and Crisson's, it could be explained as coming from a fistfight. There was not enough blood in plain sight to prove murder with a shotgun. It seemed as though the entire investigation had literally hit a wall. Forensic expert David Stockwell of the Sheriff's Scientific Investigation Division thought an alternative light source might reveal evidence hidden behind the paint in Woods' house. The alternate light source, or ALS, is a variable intensity laser beam typically used to highlight body fluid evidence on clothing or at a crime scene. Various fluids reflect specific frequencies of light. By adjusting the frequency of the laser, invisible evidence can be seen. Forensic technicians use tinted goggles and reflection-enhancing chemicals to make trace body fluids glow under the laser beam. Here, simulated bloody footprints become too faint to see with the naked eye. But with the right chemicals sprayed on them, and with the laser of the ALS set at the proper frequency, they fluoresce. In theory, at least, blood evidence could be made to glow, even from behind a coat of paint. But it would take the precise combination of chemicals, goggle tints, and laser frequencies to penetrate the painted layer.
The ALS is very good at picking up certain biological fluids, such as semen, but is not typically used to find blood because blood in itself is usually visible to the naked eye. What we were doing with the ALS was to see through that opaque layer of paint to see underneath it and what was there.
But would it work in such an unorthodox application at the home of Archie Woods? Police in San Bernardino had never used an ALS in this manner before. It was not built to illuminate an entire wall. They had to slowly comb small areas, hoping that the light could see through the paint and reveal any evidence beneath.
Okay, Richard, take your goggles off.
Little by little, they succeeded. With the ALS, the grim events at the Woods house were brought to light. There on the wall, beneath the fresh paint, was a wide splash pattern of darkened blood that had been all but invisible to the naked eye. This was the breakthrough police hoped for. They could now read the stain patterns on the wall to determine what happened. As shown here with this colored fluid, blood shed in violence can behave in several ways. It can drip, making a circular spot. Its diameter depends on how far and how much of the blood has fallen. It can form a series of streaks when flung off an object, such as a knife slashing through the air. This is called casting off. But another, equally telling kind of bloodstain appeared on Archie Woods' wall.
The largest of all bloodstains that I've ever seen at crime scenes are produced by what is called arterial spurting. And in this case, what I was seeing underneath the paint on the wall was in fact the bloodstain size consistent with arterial spurting.
The spurting patterns on the wall were consistent with the location of the wounds found on Chrisen and Thole. The ALS painted a grim picture of their violent death. The next problem was how to preserve the bloodstains for use as evidence in court. Without proof positive of arterial spurting, a shrewd defense team might claim that only a fist fight had taken place in that room, not a murder, and certainly not two murders. The ALS had illuminated the evidence bit by bit, but now the laser had to shine on the entire wall in order to take a photograph.
Hey, George, look around. Richard. What do I call you, George?
Investigators used a technique called painting with light.
Okay.
While the camera shutter was held open, the ALS was shown on the wall from left to right and top to bottom until the entire wall had been recorded through the course of several minutes. When the negatives were developed, they provided a clear, admissible picture of what the ALS revealed. That was good news for Sergeant Stroop.
With the pattern that we had on that wall with the use of the laser, it was obvious it was high velocity and a large amount of it, much more so than you'd ever have gotten from somebody with a bloody nose or getting beat up.
The evidence of violent death in that fateful room was mounting. The exposed blood patterns revealed that at the time they were shot, Shanna Thole and Richard Chrisen were lying in the bed, presenting no potential threat to their assailant. Meanwhile, their alleged killer was still at large.
That's what I was saying.
Okay. Fine.
In San Bernardino, the search for Archie Woods, suspected of killing Richard Crisson and Shanna Thole, took on new urgency.
So he's making a call right now.
To avoid being implicated in the killings, Woods' girlfriend cooperated with authorities.
No, he left a little bit later.
She disclosed to
he
the
had to go to
detectives
Kmart
that
and get
Archie
some
was in
parts for his car.
Modesto, visiting his little girl on her birthday.
So Richard and Shauna were already gone by the time he...
On Friday, the day Detective Stroop was gathering evidence at Archie's home, Archie himself was already under arrest in a neighboring county for carrying a concealed weapon in his car. He was driving a sports car at the time. Shanna Thole's sports car. From his cell in the San Bernardino jail, Woods maintained his innocence in the double homicide. He claimed that the murders were committed by members of his motorcycle gang. According to Woods, on the night of the murder, gang members asked Woods to lure Richard Crisson to his home. Woods claimed that after Crisson and Thole had arrived, he left his house as the gang instructed. Woods refused to identify the gang members involved.
Archie stuck with his story that he did not know who the other people were that had come into the house, that they were alive when he left and dead when he came back. But he would not ever give up the names of the other individuals that were involved.
Archie Woods said that he had then panicked and dumped the bodies in Big Bear. But with the help of the ALS, the police discovered the crucial piece of trace blood evidence that shot holes in Archie's story. The reclined position of the victims, as indicated by the bloodstains on the wall, just didn't add up to a violent confrontation. Detectives pieced together a likely scenario for the events of that night. Crisson and Thole had come to Archie's home to settle a dispute over a drug deal gone wrong. There was a long night of discussion and argument.
We gotta do something. I mean, he's got all this stuff, right?
Apparently, the disagreement was not resolved to Archie's satisfaction. But he let Crisson and Thole think an accord had been reached. The couple went to bed, unaware of the heavy price that Archie planned to exact from them that night. Police believe that when he thought they were sound asleep, Woods struck his helpless victims, taking their lives with blast after blast from a shotgun. Woods' one true statement was that he had dumped the bodies and the blood-soaked bedding in Big Bear, thinking no one would ever find them. Back at his house, he had first tried to clean the wall, but the blood wouldn't come off. He then covered the evidence with a thick coat of paint. But the alternate light source defied his efforts to conceal his crime. It clearly showed the pattern of the bloodstains through the opaque coat.
You know, when looking at that, there's no doubt in my mind they were killed here. They were in this bed. And, you know, that's going to show everybody, you know, what we know, or help us prove what we know, or convince a jury of what we know. And it did.
Archie Woods was given 2 life sentences for the double murder of Richard Crisson and Shanna Thole. Every criminal leaves evidence behind. The key is to know how to find it. But the most compelling evidence is also the least tangible. It's the criminal's knowledge of his actions. A new technique is testing a way of tapping the suspect's mind to turn a criminal's own memory against him. Larry Farwell is the director and chief scientist of the Human Brain Research Laboratory in Fairfield, Iowa. He has developed a new computerized system known as brain fingerprinting. It reads the memory centers of the human brain. He believes that brain fingerprinting will one day be used to positively link perpetrators to their crimes.
Brain fingerprinting is a scientific method of determining whether certain information is stored in a brain or is not stored in the brain. If an individual has committed a crime, he'll have certain information relevant to that crime stored in his brain. So we can use brain fingerprinting to determine scientifically whether he committed the crime or not.
When someone commits a crime, his brain records it as a memory. Brain fingerprinting seeks to reveal that memory by showing the suspect evidence taken from the crime scene.
Now I'm going to be putting this headband on your head.
A headband with sensors is placed on the subject. A series of pictures or words is flashed on the screen. The computer records the brain waves produced in response to what the subject sees. The responses are recorded as a waveform. By analyzing the pattern of waves, Farwell can determine if the subject is recognizing what he's seeing.
So when you have a situation where a crime has been committed, there are certain details about the crime that only the criminal would know, then you can test, does this brain have those details stored in it? If so, then the individual committed the crime. If not, then not.
The FBI is at the forefront of developing and evaluating new technology. After hearing of Farwell's system, they put it to the test. The FBI tested brain fingerprinting on their own agents at the Bureau's training facility at Quantico, Virginia.
We conducted a study on FBI agents, and the purpose of this study was to see if we could determine whether an individual is an FBI agent or not based on his or her brainwaves. If we can determine an FBI agent, then we could determine whether somebody is an agent of some, say, foreign intelligence organization or a criminal group, just based on their brain responses.
Each subject was presented with a series of words on a computer screen. Many were FBI acronyms or terms familiar only to agents. The FBI agents were specifically told to do everything they could to conceal from Farwell that they were in any way connected with the Bureau. The participant's brain response to each stimulus was measured by electrodes on a headband. The electrodes were wired to the brainwave analysis software of Farwell's system.
So what we did is to present stimuli, phrases, that only an FBI agent, because of their training, would know, mixed in with others. The FBI agents recognized them. We picked up the brain responses. We knew that they were FBI agents.
The principle behind the brain fingerprinting system is very simple. Farwell has discovered that the memory centers of the human brain respond to the sight of familiar stimuli with the distinct change in electrical activity. He calls this change a murmur.
And that is the specific brain response that we measure, that we analyze with a computer, in order to determine whether an individual recognizes the words or pictures that we flashed on the screen that are relevant to the crime or to whatever it is that we're investigating.
When the subject sees anything on the screen, it creates a pattern of brain activity. A murmur is increased brain activity produced when the subject recognizes what he's seeing.
This headband will measure the electrobrain
The test participants who did not work for the FBI did not recognize the specific FBI stimuli, so no murmurs were detected.
Some of them relevant to the FBI and some of them not.
Researchers with the United States Navy also heard the claims made about the system. They devised a test of their own to see if brain fingerprinting could distinguish military medical students from civilians. They used a list of acronyms specific to medicine and the military. Lieutenant Commander Rene Hernandez conducted the test.
The test was 100% accurate. They were able to tell each and every one. The trick with this is not so much if the technique works properly. The trick is if you ask the right questions. Because if they had not come up with a group of really good acronyms that only the students would know, then they wouldn't be able to determine the difference between the medical students and the staff, for example. So the trick is in being clever enough to ask the correct questions, because the brain will always answer it honestly.
Careful preparation of the words or pictures for a session is vital for accurate, useful results. The questions must be phrased in such a way that when a murmur occurs, it is clear why. In a murder investigation, both a witness to a shooting and the shooter might show a murmur when confronted with the murder weapon.
You have two people, only one person actually committed the crime. You have another person who simply saw it. They have the same information in their brain, so you have to get that, you have to ask the questions properly.
Rigorously constructed lab tests are one thing, but how would the brain fingerprinting system work on the front lines of a murder investigation? Could Dr. Farwell's computer read the mind of an actual killer? Like a page torn from a science fiction novel, brain fingerprinting might be the next century's most powerful new forensic tool. No criminal's secrets would be safe when his own brain waves could bring him to justice. Captain Blaine Corral, commander of the Investigations Division of the Alexandria, Virginia Police, has also tested the system. Though he was initially skeptical about its use in the real world, he was quickly won over.
The vision I had was like of the Three Stooges with a salad bowl sitting on the top of someone's head with wires coming out of it. And I thought, not only would this technique or this technology never really be useful, but there's no way in the world it would ever be accepted by the law enforcement community.
Corral compared brain fingerprinting with the polygraph, the lie detector used by law enforcement for many years. The polygraph is still not admissible in court, but has become a standard tool to guide police.
The polygraph works on the theory that you can't control your heart rate or something called your galvanic skin response or your breathing patterns. The brain fingerprinting sort of takes that a step further and recognizes the fact that you can't control the electrical activity in your brain.
A polygraph registers only stress or emotional responses, such as heart and respiration rates and sweating. By analyzing the readings, the operator tries to discern whether a subject is being truthful or deceptive in his answers. But in some cases, the polygraph can be fooled. Brain fingerprinting is often more general. It can identify the presence of hidden information in persons fraudulently claiming either knowledge or ignorance of certain facts. But again, it reveals only the presence of the information, not the details.
So they're going to both help us toward the same end, which is ultimately to find out the truth about what we're investigating and formulate the best case for presentation in court, but they're going to sort of attack it from different angles. Both can be very crucial to a successful case.
Serious questions remain about the wholesale application of Dr. Farwell's invention. Would a murmur be revealed if a killer were in a drunken blackout or a psychotic state when he took his victim's life? In such cases, there might not be a brain fingerprint after the fact. What if right after he committed the crime, the killer received a severe head trauma?
But that's what actually happened with the the person who was the bodyguard who was in the car with Princess Diana. Everybody thinks he's trying to cover up something. He had such a severe traumatic injury, he probably will never remember that because the brain never was healthy enough to store that information into long-term memory.
In most cases, brain fingerprinting a witness or an accomplice can reveal knowledge of all kinds of crime, from espionage to terrorist plots. At least that's the promise of this technology. Brain fingerprinting is not yet admissible in the United States, but it might be only a matter of time before it becomes a routine tool. The relatively new technique of DNA profiling is known to be so dead-on accurate that genetic evidence is readily accepted. Ultimately, scientists and criminal investigators agree that brain fingerprinting shows great potential in murder investigations. In a shooting death with no witnesses, the killer would be the only person with intimate knowledge of the crime. With Dr. Farwell's computer, the murderer's own brain could become a witness for the prosecution. Technology is providing new ways to reveal evidence that would have been lost or unavailable just a few years ago. Today, investigators can peer beneath paint, lift a smudged palm print from a bedsheet, and perhaps even tap into a suspect's memory to find the truth. There may be no way to completely stop crime, but forensic science is finding ever more ingenious tactics to catch criminals.